Hey guys, I'm Jax and I just saw the new Marvel TV series Echo, which I found to be a surprisingly accurate, if not unintentionally ironic title for this series. Because despite the fact that some of the themes, concepts and ideas at play on paper, in theory, are surprisingly unique and fresh and could have been something truly special, ultimately feels like it ended up kind of being nothing, because it feels like, and it was, 8 episodes hacked apart into 5 episodes. Everything feels very messy and underdeveloped. Nothing is given room to breathe. Everything feels so rushed that anything that I really enjoyed, like in setup, is paid off, but it doesn't feel earned. This really just ended up being so underdeveloped that it undermines everything that could have worked in this series. And so unfortunately, and ironically, the TV series Echo is nothing more than, well, an echo of the TV series it could have been. I imagine I was like most Marvel fans when they heard that the Echo series was being announced, and their initial reaction was just, what? Why? Wait, sorry, who? Were they in Daredevil? They weren't in She-Hulk. I didn't watch She-Hulk. Were they in She-Hulk? They definitely weren't in Miss Marvel, because I saw that as homework for the Marvels. But no, they were a minor D-list superhero / supervillain or whatever from Hawkeye. Yeah, they were just this random person in Hawkeye, and now they're getting their own show! And it once again felt like a really weird choice for a character, and it just felt like another case of Marvel kind of diluting their product by just creating so much stuff. She was fine in Hawkeye. I didn't hate her, didn't love her, but it just was like, it reminded me of the Agatha Harkness, Darkness, Diaries of Doom and Destiny, or whatever the hell they've called that show in the end. House of Harkness? Who cares? Whatever they've called that show that probably exists, maybe? Who knows? It felt like that, where it's like, stop making so many shows and maybe really kind of focus in on one show and make it good. They haven't all been terrible. I've probably liked more of them than I've disliked them. But overall, Echo just felt like a series where it was like, why are you doing this? And that's what I felt like. Until I started watching the show, and I was like, wait, hold on. This is a good idea. Like, not what we got, for sure, and maybe not even the 8 episodes they created that they hacked down into the 5 that we got. But on paper, in theory, like in the boardroom, when you're pitching ideas and stuff, Echo is actually a great idea. Echo is this supervillain turned anti-hero, maybe hero, and she is like the apprentice to Kingpin. And she killed Kingpin in Hawkeye, so Kingpin's out for revenge. And there's all this interesting potential between the villain and our once villain turned hero. That, on paper, in theory, a fantastic idea. But ultimately in the show, very underdeveloped, very underwhelming. And there's like 2 or 3 scenes that really work. Particularly, I love the idea that Kingpin had this like underling, this apprentice, and she's deaf, so he has to do sign language to like communicate with her at all without someone else in the room, but he never learns. I feel like that says so much about their relationship. Like there's little things like that in the show that really, really work, but ultimately it doesn't work. And I really think the idea of seeing Kingpin and Echo in the past, in flashbacks of him training her up as a kid, as a teenager, as an adult, that should have been a full episode. I don't know if that's a full episode they cut out, but we get 1 scene or maybe 2 scenes of that kind of stuff. Really good stuff, but I want more. I want way, way more, so that when he comes back, you just have so much more of an appreciation and understanding of their characters, their dynamics, their relationship, because it's really interesting. But they just don't do anything with it. It's such wasted potential. Like every single point I'm going to make about this show of what they set up, like in theory, like, oh, that is good. But then when you see it, you're like, ha, no, not good enough. So in this series, Echo escapes from Kingpin's goons after killing him, and she goes back to her hometown, a place she hasn't been since she was like 8 or 9 years old. I love a story like this. Someone from the big city brings their big city problems to the small town, and maybe everyone in the small town has secrets of their own, even though the main character who comes to the small town has the biggest secret of all. It's got a bit of Twin Peaks, it's got a bit of Banshee, it's got a bit of a third example. There's like 700 examples, but my brain stopped working and I forgot all examples. But there is definitely a fantastic third example of this big city guy coming to the small town. And the small town has its little quirks and characters, and we've got all of that. We've got a lovable idiot goof. We've got the father figure. We've got the estranged mum. We've got the estranged friend. We've got well, we've got those 4 characters, and on paper, in theory, once again, everything in theory is such a good idea. And I feel like I should love this. I love the idea of someone who used to be good and friendly and nice, comes back to their hometown after 20 years, and everyone's like, oh, I'm so glad you're back. But little do they know that she's a psychopathic murderer who works for Kingpin, and she's evil. Well, she's not at all in this show. That's gonna come up with issue number 3 or 4. But in theory, that's a really great idea where she comes back to the town, they all want to reconnect with her, everyone's estranged, and they've all got their own little secrets going on, but her secret's bigger and worse. It's all so good. It's ripe for juicy, tasty content or whatever, themes and conflicts and cause and effect and other word juxtaposition. It is ripe for the pickings, like some kind of small town tree that you pick the apple off and eat and then share it with your small town friends. It is so ripe for good storytelling, and there's none of that in the show. She arrives and the guy's like, I'm the fun-loving goofy guy, and the friend's like, I'm the estranged best friend, you didn't call me. And then she's like, yeah, I'm sorry I didn't call you. And then like the show's over. Like everyone gets like one little tiny bit, and it feels like every small character has a full episode in which they'd have like a whole thing with Echo that's just cut. Like so much of the show is so rushed and so brief. It is so weird. I found it so infuriating and disappointing, because when I realized what the show was gonna be, I was like, oh, this actually I think is gonna really work for me. And it just didn't, because it's just like the biggest issue is it's just so underdeveloped, which makes it feel messy and like kind of incoherent at times and random, just because it feels like so much is missing. It feels like somehow too long a movie, yet too short a show. And it's because they had filmed 8 episodes, they've cut it down to 5. So it isn't 5 episodes that are underdeveloped. It's 5 episodes that have 3 episodes worth of scenes missing, especially the first episode, which is just a previously, essentially, with a couple of new scenes. And if you haven't seen Hawkeye, it's incoherent and nonsense, which is weird because it's alienating anyone who isn't into the MCU. Now, I've been pretty negative, so let's talk about 2 aspects of the show that I thought worked really, really well. And one of them is her Native American kind of ancestry and her roots. And there's a lot of really interesting stuff at play. And just like everything in the show, it is underdeveloped and there's not enough of it. But there is a really interesting, and I didn't realize, mystical kind of supernaturally, vaguely supernatural, mystical kind of element to Echo, to her Native American past, and all of that stuff I really loved. I do think some of the flashbacks to other characters in the past don't fully work, and there's like little elements to them that I'm like, wait, what? Particularly one game, there's like a game of ancient lacrosse that's going to deem if a tribe is banished or not. Which just, I just had so many questions. I had so many questions. But I like the aesthetic and I like the ideas at play. There's another one that I thought was really, really good, but then there's this big hero shot and she's not taking cover, and I'm just like, what? Okay, sure. But I really liked it for the most part. But then right at the end, when it all kind of comes together and pays off, it's just so rushed. It's so brief. And if it was a movie, we'd have enough. But it's a TV series, so you really want to kind of get into the nitty-gritty of all these things and have time to develop them properly. So at the end, it's a big emotional payoff. And for me, it just kind of fell flat. The actual action scene at the end that kind of combines with all this stuff as well, I thought was kind of laughable, just with the way it was framed and like staged. In theory, I love the idea. But yeah, the way it was framed and staged and like choreographed was kind of lackluster and boring, which I think you could say for most of the action. Even moments where I really liked with like The Devil Who Dares, he rocks up and there's some really great stuff in there, but they bite off more than they can chew with the one shot, and it feels like really kind of dancey and like fake, kind of like a draft, like you're seeing like the behind the scenes of like, this was draft 1, look at the draft 400 when we actually shot it. And so that's disappointing, even though in theory I love the idea. Pretty much this show is like great ideas, great ideas, terrible execution. The other thing I really liked that I thought was definitely not utilized enough was the fact that our character cannot hear. And so there are a couple of times when she's like in a situation with villains and goons and all that kind of stuff where it just cuts to them and it's silent and you don't know what the hell they're talking about, and it's really effective, it's really interesting, but they don't do it enough. Except for right at the end. There's one big moment right at the end which I think they did it really well, but throughout the show I don't think they did it enough, so it kind of felt like this random thing they put in, because they're like, oh, we got to do that for 2 seconds. but I feel like they could have really kind of doubled down and kind of emphasized on this thing that she has to deal with and really push it for like long extended periods of time in the show, because I found it really fascinating and interesting and a really unique perspective that we never see. And especially for like an action hero, I thought it was really cool. But yeah, I just don't think they did enough with it. Like there were moments where I'm like, oh, that's really cool. And then by the time I'd thought how awesome and interesting it was over. And like they didn't do it again for another 45 minutes. So yeah, like everything in the show, great in theory. That execution though! Ugh. And my last issue with the show Echo is that it follows the character Echo, who is a supervillain or, you know, semi-villain or whatever, or just a regular villain character who worked for Kingpin and killed people for Kingpin and all this stuff. And there is no true proper reconciliation with the fact that she was a villain and is now an anti-hero hero. Like, it's just so underdeveloped. Like everything else, there's just no moment where, like, any of the characters, like, she's come back to her hometown, and there are moments where the characters are like, you know, even speaking for her to talk to Kingpin. And there are moments where, like, they need to have this realization that their friend, this childhood friend she hasn't seen for 20 years, is now a killer, a monster. And she might be trying to redeem herself, but she did these awful things. And there's just no reconciliation. There's no redemption. And like maybe like on the very paper thin surface level there is, because she's doing good now. But for me it wasn't enough. It wasn't satisfying. And so I found it very frustrating and disappointing, because it's just wasted potential. Like there's nothing more fascinating and interesting and compelling than a really strong villain turned anti-hero turned hero. It's one of the most satisfying, interesting arcs. Just ask every Last Airbender fan. They're always the most compelling and interesting character, at least for me, when done well. And so an entire series based around a character like that, but they don't do it at all or properly. It's just, yeah, like the rest of this show, it's almost something, but it's ultimately nothing.